tonight I'm Josie Way, and tonight I have with me as co-hosts Ken Demers and Bill Hannon. And our guest is our friend Joe Higgins, who is a medium and an author. And he's written several books about mediumship and something that everyone can get messages through signs from spirit loved ones, signs from heaven, but messages from above. Welcome.
Thanks for having me back, Josie and guys.
Good to see you, Joe.
Good to be back.
Yep. So this new book that you put together, what was the inspiration? Was there any one thing that kind of sparked you along the way, or was it something that you just felt like
well, it's a follow-up book to Hello, Anyone Home,
right,
that we talked about a couple of years ago, on the basis of how signs are received and how they're put together after one of our loved ones passes over. So it had such a great feedback from people. They wanted some more information on signs, so I decided to write this follow-up book. I got your message.
Oh,
Understanding
right.
signs
That's
from
the name
deceased
of
loved
it?
ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of people can relate to getting signs. So we put together probably like 35 or 40 stories, individual stories in the book. Plus I ask certain questions and answer them for people concerning some of the most common signs.
So would somebody reading the book who maybe has lost somebody close, has had an experience or two, but just kind of shirked it off, they would recognize something possibly that?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because if they think they might have gotten a sign or they're not sure, they will see some of the common signs that we have, but they'll also read accounts from other people that have lost loved ones, children, spouses, friends, whatever, and they'll see that they got signs, and a lot of them will be similar to perhaps the sign that they thought they weren't sure about. So they can relate to it, and I wanted people to relate to other people's stories to let them know that they're not alone having these experiences.
And they really are signs. I know after my son passed, a friend of mine and I kept seeing butterflies, a lot of butterflies, and it was too early in the year for butterflies. He passed in April. So they were very, very early butterflies if they were, and the coincidence just was that both of us were experiencing it.
That's one of the big things with signs, is if people make that immediate connection that it is from their loved one, then they've accepted it, and it's a true sign. So they really don't have to fight over, if it was or if it wasn't. If it really grabs you right away, you can tell it's an authentic sign.
Well, it's interesting, Josie, that you bring that subject up. That specific instance, because of the butterflies on the cover of the book, right?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to have certain signs that I talked about that were very common, and one of them obviously is the butterfly. Some of the other ones are feathers and coins and numbers. And the reason I picked some of these, in the first book I talk about sounds and music and smells, which I include in this book also.
Right.
But I wanted to also put in some more of the more common ones, like I said, like feathers and numbers and coins.
Feathers, numbers, and coins are always interesting, especially when coins keep turning up for people. All right.
I don't understand coins.
Right, but that's what I was just trying to make a point right here, right now, is that these are interesting signs, but I find the butterfly so interesting, because the butterfly being a sign of metamorphosis. And here they've left us, they've changed form, they're more in spiritual form, and so I identify the butterfly so succinctly with the change from physical to spiritual.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons why they use that particular sign, or they use a feather, especially coins now, because it has historical background. And people, when you tell a story about, I'm starting to find all these pennies after so-and-so passed over, a lot of people can relate to that, because it's been throughout history. A lot of stories written about it, people have told people about it, so they can say, that happens to me.
Songs about pennies from heaven.
Exactly. Right. So they use that historical basis to continue that particular type of method. And once people start to pick it up, many times when people find coins, it's a repetitive thing. So it increases the strength of the sign when these coins continue to appear over a longer period of time. And a lot of times people will find them during times of stress or when they're thinking about their loved one or special occasions.
So you're saying that people are finding the coins in odd places?
In odd places, yes, absolutely. It gets to the point where when people find some of these coins, they break out in laughter because it's so obvious. You know, you're talking about people that just vacuum a rug, 4 or 5 times and it's pristine, and they turn around and there's like a quarter in the middle of it. And then like an hour later, they go upstairs after they had just, done their bedroom spread and stuff, and there's another coin sitting right in the middle of it.
In the middle of the bed.
Right in the middle of the bed. And, repetitive things like that, and then it gets to a point where people just laugh and they're like, oh, thank you, I know you're here, and they look up and say thank you, which is important. If you get a sign, thank your loved ones, because it really, it connects that loving bond that you still share on this side and the other side. So just a quick thank you and a smile is worth its weight in gold.
And it's a way of knowing that they're okay.
And they're still in our lives. And so when we get these signs during certain periods in our lives, especially around special occasions, which I talk about in the book, they want you to know that they're still there to experience these special occasions with you, like weddings, even funerals, first communions, people's first, a child's first baseball game. It could be anything, any special occasion the family's going to be around. They want to let you know, hey, listen, Dad's still there, or Granddad's still there, or Sis is there, or something like that. So they will try to show up around those occasions to say, listen, I want to enjoy this event with you, even though I'm not physically here. I'm here.
All right, you're talking about group signs, and this would be an example of this would be what?
With group signs, it's more effective for them to send a sign to a particular group than it would be to each individual. Because to assign to each individual, which is part of a group, could be confusing and it's only one-on-one. But let's say you belong to a social organization. Let's say a past president of an Elks has passed over and he wants to send a sign. He can send a sign to the entire group, and not only will the people in the group understand the sign, but they'll have a bond within that organization that he's sending a sign not to just to the individual, but also the organization in total. So instead of sending a sign to his friend Jack at home or his friend Bill at work, he'll send the sign to Jack and Bill at one of the Elks organizational meetings, or maybe a fishing derby or something like that. And then the members can talk about it and say, oh yeah, that's Frank, he's still around, still playing jokes on us. And that's how they can send it to an entire group.
Right.
Well, you have one story in there about that, about a group sign.
There's a few stories in there on different group signs, but that's an example that they had given to me, for civic organizations, or even at a wedding, or a funeral. Actually, that happened to my aunt when she had passed over. She went to church every day for 40 years, right on time, never missed, it was never late. And the funeral after she had passed, the casket was right at the beginning of the aisle, waiting to go down, no priest. Priest was 45 minutes late. And everyone there we laughed because we all understood. It was Eileen's little way of saying to us that she was around because she was very punctual. And the fact that a priest being 45 minutes late for any funeral, let alone her funeral.
Right.
And so it showed that each one of us, it was a group sign, and each one of us could share it with our siblings, but also with our friends. And when you do that, the sign becomes more powerful, and there's a bonding between the living that are all experiencing this one sign from one person on the other side. And for that split, few minutes when you share that sign in a group, it's a spiritual connection. It's a spiritual connection between each individual in that group. And that's very powerful, it's very spiritual, and it's very intimate. And that's one of the reasons why they do it to the groups.
Now, also, your little crib notes, why do people not expect signs?
Or don't experience them?
Or don't experience them?
There's a lot of reasons why people don't accept signs. Some of them are cultural reasons or religious reasons. They're afraid that it goes against what their belief system is, and it'll challenge them too much to be able to accept it. Other times, some people are just scared of a signs and they're not sure of an afterlife. They're afraid of it because of certain cultural things, and they might not want it. They're like, okay, they passed over. I send them my prayers and my love, but I don't want to hear back from them. So, and then other times people say, oh, I want a sign, but subconsciously they really don't want a sign.
Yeah.
So there are various reasons, and a big one is people still might be in grief, and a sign might be a shock to them, or it might make them confused and cause anxiety and stress. And that's the last thing they want to do, is they don't want to scare you, so they might hold off until it's a better time to send that sign.
Yeah, I know some Native Americans, some groups of Native Americans have differing opinions on ghosts, and spirit loved ones become ghosts in some situation, after they've passed, and they don't want them roaming. They want them settled and at peace. So they don't like to pay attention to signs unless they get them from animal signs. Then those they will listen to.
A lot of times when the animals will send a sign, like in that instance, it'll be a sign of like a premonition of things to come. And that's their culture, and that's the way they accept their signs. They kind of like hands off, let the deceased rest in peace, but they will accept them through the the natural world. And those signs can actually come from a loved one, but through the animal.
Through the natural world.
Depending on the culture. We talk about feathers and we talk about coins and actually numbers we can talk about. These are used all cross cultures, and they've been used through thousands of years. So that's why they're very common also.
I got a question for you. I haven't worn this shirt in 2 years. I've never worn these pants here tonight. And who comes walking in dressed identical? And Bill has the same pants. He blew the shirt, but got the pants. What kind of a sign would that be?
That means
Harmonics.
you have very good taste, Ken.
Oh, okay. Well, not really, but you're in trouble if that's the criteria.
Or it could have meant you got the memo.
No, I call it harmonics, being on similar frequencies.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
We're both in tuned on some level, which could be kind of scary.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But I wanted to mention about numbers because those are
Yes.
very fascinating, and a lot of people can relate to them.
Well, it's a science in and of itself.
Yes.
And it's interesting the way that numbers, especially a loved one's numbers, seem to recur.
Our whole lives are surrounded by numbers. We live by time, we live by dates, everything is associated with numbers. Birthdays, anniversaries, people, even the exact time when they pass or when they're born, and they're used in all cultures. So it's an easy way for them to send us a sign that we're going to recognize right off the bat. So if a loved one has lost their spouse and their wedding anniversary was like 5/21/48, and that number keeps coming up to this particular person around their anniversary,
Right.
There's a good chance that's a sign because it's personal between those two people. So it's easy for them to use that particular number. A lot of times we'll see numbers in sequence, and that's to show us that they're still around us and that they want to tap in and say hi. Some people, it's going to be related between you and the loved one that crossed over. I actually keep a journal now when I see sequential numbers, because when I see them, I always symbolize that Spirit's just tapping in, saying that we're still with you and still working with you, and I thank them. So I started keeping a journal probably about 3 months ago of how many times I see sequential numbers. And I didn't realize I see them 2 or 3 times a day sometimes, and some day it'll only be once. But they're starting to show a pattern. So I don't know, maybe a year from now, maybe I'll do a book on numbers. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's pretty strange, that the same numbers are coming up on certain days.
Well, I look at it not as strange, but as really cool. I mean, because I'm connected with the angel kingdom, whenever I need angelic help or assistance, or I'm a little down in the dumps or something like that, I will get messages like the 444, the repetitive number. I will have a car cut me off with that on their license plate, so that I can't miss seeing it. Or I'll be working and I work with numbers, and I'll see somebody's salary was 444.44.
Right.
So it's like really in your face. You
Yeah,
can't miss it.
you
And that's
can't
another
miss it.
reason why they use particular numbers, is because it's so obvious. It's so
Yeah.
obvious. There's a story in the book about a mother and daughter who was driving through a particular neighborhood that their son frequented that had passed away. And as they were driving through the neighborhood, they came around a turn, and there was a car in front of them, and it had the number. I'm not sure what number it was. It might have been like 413, and then it said RIP. Well, 413 was the son's birthday. And obviously, RIP, rest in peace, right in front of both of them. So that's like a sign to a group of more than one.
Right.
So the daughter and the mother both got it, and they got to share that sign together.
Wow.
And they cried and they laughed because they knew it was from their son and their brother.
You talk about numbers like that. I'm thinking, I remember one time last year I was in a supply house and I bought something, and it was a number like that, 423.63 cents. I went to another supply house, and it was almost identical to the penny. The receipt, the two
Right.
receipts from two different places.
Right.
The coincidence of that happening would be,
Probability is just crazy.
Yeah.
I think Spirit does get a little chuckle out of doing stuff like that, because I work with a lot of numbers, and it'll be interesting how they'll, with just a twist, a number will refer to another case, but they'll be so similar, and the odds of them being so similar are very small.
Right. So it's easy to manipulate the numbers or grab our attention at those numbers, because then our mind can do the filing system. Like, all right, that's a birth date, that's a death date,
Right.
that's a wedding anniversary. And people might say, well, that's stretching it, but it's not between those two people. Okay.
Right.
So 428 could be someone's birthday, but to someone else it could mean something else. So it depends on who's receiving it and where it's coming from. Another thing about the coins I wanted to mention is one of the reasons they use coins and have done for a long time is because it grabs our attention immediately. It's a sign that has a monetary value. So when you're walking down the street or anywhere and you see a quarter or a penny or something like that, you're going to grab your attention more than if it's a bottle cap, because subconsciously or consciously that has particular value. Okay, but now when they start to repeat that sign and you start to see pennies, and they'll keep them in the same denomination, one after the other, the sign begins to build up and it becomes more of a powerful connection. But they find it very easy because that's our natural culture is, we see something of monetary value, we're going to zoom right in. So they want to get our attention the easiest way, and what's a better way than put a coin in front of us?
Or a feather in the middle of a house.
Or a feather in the middle of the house. Another thing with feathers, too, is one of the reasons they use them is because the connotation throughout history that they've been related to the afterlife or related to angels. So people that see a feather that is not there, or a series of feathers that appear during a certain time period or something like that, they can relate to that because they've heard other stories. They've heard parents and other generations talk about feathers, and they've read about it in books in other cultures. So that's one of the reasons why they'll use the feather. Also, it's a very, very easy sign that does not disturb the person that's getting it. Okay? So if you wanted to contact a loved one and you had a choice of a giant gong, okay, or dropping a feather on grandma, which one you're going to pick?
Right.
You're going to pick the feather,
Right.
because you don't want to upset grandma. Now, if you really needed to get grandma's attention,
Right.
you could hit her with 3 or 4 feathers,
Yeah.
and they do that.
Right.
They'll make them bigger, more ornate,
Right.
or from a different types of bird that you wouldn't expect in that area. And that's like a shout. That's a shout in the feather world. But that's one of the reasons, because it doesn't cause stress or anxiety as opposed to like an explosion or something like that.
One thing I find about feathers that's interesting from the various stories I've read over time is that some people will get a feather and it's like they'll take it and they'll put it on a mirror or something like this to kind of remind them all the time. Other times, especially the small white feathers, they have them, and then it seems like they just disappear. And I think that's more like from the angelic realm than you have from, I mean, that's my interpretation.
Well, the feathers that come to people are not necessarily all from deceased loved ones. Some of them are from our guides and teachers, or the angelic realm, which is a higher developed spirit.
Sure.
And in that case, that could absolutely happen. We have a story in there from a friend I had met a few months ago who finds feathers all the time. And it's very interesting. Another reasons why they give feathers to people is because people have a tendency to collect them once they start to receive them.
Right.
And then they display them. And then they talk to other people about, hey, I found a new feather. And it spreads this sign across our culture for other generations to realize that connection between feathers and the afterlife.
Right.
So people collect them and they show them, and it's easy to talk about something
And
like
that's
that
exactly-
because people can relate to it without being scared. Like I saw a shadow or,
Right,
or
that's
something
right,
like that.
that's right.
I found a feather. It's very
Right,
innocent,
right.
and it's not a,
Right.
you know.
One of my favorite angelic feather stories, April Welch, Sheehan, she used to get white feathers come floating down with her all the time. And her, at the time, 10, 12-year-old daughter was standing in the middle of a schoolyard telling 3 or 4 other girls about how her mother would get feathers, white feathers from angels. And as they're standing there talking, a white feather came down in the middle of the 4 girls, and it was like,
Well, that's your answer to the group question.
Well, my
See, when that feather came down and the little girl was telling her friends about feathers,
she was telling about small white feathers from the
Right.
angels, and one came floating down in between them.
right, so all of a sudden all the girlfriends actually experienced that.
Yeah.
my husband Jim took a class with April, and in the middle of the classroom, a small white feather fluttered down for the entire class to see.
Wow, that
In the middle
good
of the
example
classroom.
what he's talking about then.
Right, and then
That's
people,
a definite group message.
that's a group message, and people share messages. Like we're sharing these stories now about feathers, and I'm sure people, some of our listeners, are going to be talking about, oh yeah, that happens to me, or it happens to my sister. or
Right,
something.
right. But I just find it, you know, interesting. I wouldn't say funny. I find it interesting that, again, most of these feathers that, you know, like you say, people collect and whatnot, and yet it still seems like there seems to be a special type of feather
that disappears.
that disappears. And to me, that's almost like a connection to the angelic realm rather than a guide or something like that.
Right. I mean, a friend of mine, Carl Johnson, that he finds all these feathers and he's got a beautiful display of them now, was telling me he was out jogging one morning, and it was probably like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sun was just coming up, and he was down by the lake. And so he's jogging along, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, this beautiful feather just comes down and lands right in front of him. And he was like amazed. He's looking around, there's no birds, there's nothing, it's quiet. So he reaches down to pick it up, and as he's picking it up, this lady walks by him and says to him, "You realize you're blessed?" And he looked at her and said, "Yes, I know that." And he continued to pick up the feather, and he went to turn to ask her a question, and she was gone.
Oh,
And he says, this lady was not jogging, and I was on a long stretch of path that wasn't winding, and she had nowhere to go.
right.
But so then he realized, he goes, oh, this particular feather is from the angelic realm, as opposed to,
What kind of feather was it?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at my notes.
Interesting. Well, that's exactly the reason why I brought this up, though, because a lot of people do distinguish the difference between the two.
Yeah.
And, you know, the very fact that he had an appearance and then the apparition was gone.
Right.
You know, it's,
And usually people that find feathers, they find them all the time. That's their gig.
Yeah.
It's like people that find coins, they find them all the time. Because once they sink into what works,
right. They
they're
make
going to stay with what works.
they make the connection with that frequency.
Right.
Right.
And it works. Why mess it up and decide to say, all right, we're going to stop sending feathers or coins, and we're going to start sending them, you know, favorite songs or something. you
Sure.
know?
right.
So,
Oh, I get them.
They might throw those in. They might throw them in once in a while.
Right.
But people, you know, would be like, you know, I haven't found a feather lately. You know, and then,
Right.
then all of a sudden they'll find one.
Very interesting.
I was telling you earlier, one time I had peacocks, and I came walking out of my house. I opened the door and step out onto the porch type thing, and an 18-inch long peacock feather hit me in the top of the head. There's no peacocks. You know, they were somewhere else in the yard. So that thing was hanging on the side of the house, or I have no explanation for it.
Well, that's it. A lot of times these things don't have any type of explanation. So what you want to do is you want to, if you really feel like it's from a loved one or someone in angelic realm, then it is, because they put that thought in your mind to be aware of what's happening. And we want to remind people too, over 20 million Americans believe that they've had some type of sign from a deceased loved one. And that's just in America. And that's just one particular
Well,
poll.
where did you get that number?
That poll comes from a Pew study that does one of the major organizations that does polling for all types of information.
Right.
So that's just in America. You know, you imagine all over the world. Imagine the people that weren't polled.
Sure.
I wasn't polled, so 20 million and one.
That's about 8%. That's about 8%.
And that's, and that doesn't include the people that were around before the polling took place. I mean, I'm sure they have ways to balance and stuff, but it's a lot of people. So we want to let people know they're not alone. Other people are having signs, and it's important to say thank you once you get it. And don't be anxious over it. Talk about it with your friends, and I guarantee either your friends had it or one of their friends or someone in your family has experienced some type of sign.
Yeah. My son sometimes lets me know that he's been around and with purple feathers that couldn't possibly come from any bird that exists. But he had a stuffed animal that had purple feathers, a little boa type thing around its neck. And we were going to get rid of it, and he said, no, don't get rid of it. It makes it different, So we don't have it anymore. But the purple feathers just keep showing up.
That's because he has it.
That's right.
He keeps dropping them in on you.
Okay. Well, I see we only have a few minutes here.
Right.
Thank you so very much for being with us today, and thank you for being with us.
Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation to be able to bridge different realities and whatnot.
If there's one thing you'd like people to know about signs,
It's basically that millions of people get them. They're a simple hello from our deceased loved ones, and that we don't die. Life continues, and it really is a wonderful experience, this side and the other side. So never lose hope. And you can get my book on Amazon.com or my website, joehiggins.com.
Oh, that's excellent, excellent. Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot
I
of
look
people.
forward to
Do we
reading
have
it.
another book coming?
Oh, there will be.
Oh yeah,
On what subject?
I can't say.
You're going to keep
Top
us in
secret.
suspense?
Well, what happens is, like last year, I was going to write this book, and instead I ended up writing the book on veterans. Okay, so sometimes I'll start working on a book, but something will inspire me to write it on something because it's more important at that particular time. So there was a lot of suicides going on with veterans, so I wrote Always Connected for Veterans, answering some of their questions. So this book was put off. So the book that I'm planning next could be put off, so that's why I don't want to announce it yet.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
I'll let you know, Ken.
And we'll have to do another show about what it's like to do writing.
Sure, that would be great.
I don't know where we are time-wise.
As far as doing writing, is the major ingredient inspiration and perspiration?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Inspiration is the fun part. Perspiration is the you have to be focused and
The
disciplined.
disciplined.
So we
How
can
much
talk about
time do you
that.
spend a day doing writing, actual writing?
It depends.
It
It depends on the
varies.
project. It depends on what else is going on in my life. So we could spend a whole show talking about that.
Right.
Yes, we could. Thank you very much,
Thank you for having me.
and we'll have you back.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that was very
I think we
insightful.
just-
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Psychic Holistic Spotlight.